Hi everyone. Today what we're going to do is combine what we practiced yesterday with factoring out GCF with what we learned last week with the T-chart. So we're going to be factoring twice. Now before we get started, I want to remind you Friday is a catch-up day. If you need 3 days to process this material instead of the 2 days that we have planned, make sure that you take that time and you reach out to me and you let me know what questions you have. Example 1 looks like we might be able to set up a T-chart right away because we have x squared kind of all alone. But because this has a negative in front of it, the T-chart will not work. We have to have regular, plain old positive x squared in order to set up our T-chart factoring. So the first thing I'm going to do is divide that -1 out of every term so that it's ready to set up my T-chart. Now that -1 can turn into a negative sign or leave it as a -1 if you need that there to help you organize your work. On the first term, those negatives cancel. On the second term, those negatives cancel. And on the third term, those negatives cancel. So I end up with 3 positive values inside my parenthesis. Now when I set up my T-chart, I'm looking at what's inside the parenthesis. So I'm multiplying to that constant of +16, and I'm adding to the coefficient of x, which is a +8. The two numbers that do that are 4 times 4, and 4 plus 4 gives me an 8. Now when I factor this, I'm going to keep that negative or the -1 on the outside of my parenthesis as I write this as x plus 4 times x plus 4. Now hopefully a lot of you at this point recognize we have the same thing multiplied by itself, so we can simplify this one, keeping the negative on the outside of the parenthesis. I get x plus 4 squared. Second example, I'm going to give you guys a really big hint to make this a little easier for yourselves. We cannot do T-chart until that first term is regular plain old x squared. So I am going to factor or divide 2 out of every term. Writing that GCF on the outside of the parentheses, my 2's cancel, leaving me with x squared. -12 divided by 2 gives me a -6x, and -14 divided by 2 gives me a -7. Now I can set up my T-chart with what's inside the parentheses. I'm multiplying to the constant of -7 and adding to the coefficient of x, which is a -6. So what two numbers multiply to -7 and add to -6? Well, the only numbers that multiply to 7 are 1 and 7. In order to multiply to a negative, I need one of them to be negative. Since I'm adding to a negative, I need my larger number to be negative. So 1 plus -7 would mean I spent $6 more than I had, which would give me that -6 as a result. When I factor this, I'm going to keep the GCF out front. The reason I'm emphasizing that is because that is a huge mistake that I've seen from my algebra students in the past, is wanting to drop that as we continue to factor. Don't do it. We've got x plus 1 and x minus 7. We're going to practice 2 more. I'm going to give you guys a chance to see if you caught on to that really big hint I gave you on the last one. What's the GCF of 4, 12, and 40? Hopefully you came up with 4. We're going to divide everything by 4 so that we have regular, plain old x squared when we go to do our T-chart. That GCF goes on the outside of the parentheses. We're not going to lose it. My 4's cancel, leaving me with x squared. 12 divided by 4 gives me a 3x, and -40 divided by 4 gives me a -10. Now what's inside the parentheses is ready for the T-chart. We're multiplying to that constant of -10 and adding to that coefficient of x, which is 3. Which numbers do that? Multiplying to a negative, I need one positive, one negative, and since I'm adding to a positive, I need my larger number to be positive. So 5 times negative 2 is negative 10, and 5 plus negative 2 is positive 3. When I continue to factor this, yep, you guessed it, I'm going to keep the GCF in front of my parentheses. We have x plus 5 and x minus 2. All right, one more opportunity. What is the GCF of negative 3, positive 3, and negative 36? This time, in addition to factoring that 3, we need that x squared term to be positive, so we're going to divide everything by negative 3. Keeping that negative 3 on the outside, that is part of my problem. Those cancel, leaving me with a positive x squared, which is what I want. Positive 3 times negative 3 is negative 1x. It could be really helpful to write that this time, since that's what we'll be adding to. And negative 36 divided by negative 3 is a positive 12. Now we're ready to set up our t-chart, multiplying to that constant of positive 12 and adding to the coefficient of negative 1. Which two numbers do that? In order to multiply to a positive, I need two positives or two negatives. There are no numbers that multiply to 12 and add to negative 1. So this one is completely factored. And I'm just going to run through a couple of options. The most common ones that you're going to think of are 3 times 4. 3 times 4 is positive 12, but 3 plus 4 is positive 7. Negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12, but negative 3 plus negative 4 is negative 7. The only way to add to that negative 1 is if the 4 were negative and the 3 were positive. But when I try that on the other side, negative 4 times positive 3, that would give me a negative 12. So I'm unable to continue factoring this one. So it's done the way that it is.